that you wrote had to do with a Dremel item that was taken from Mr. Robinson's home?
Correct.
And did you request certain what are called elimination samples in regard to items that were recovered from his home?
Yes.
Tell the court what an elimination sample is as opposed to a sample that relates to what's called a POI, person of interest.
So an elimination sample is a sample taken from a known individual that it may be assumed that they could have come into contact with it. If I were to say swab your vehicle, then I would want your DNA sample as an elimination to eliminate you in order to look for any additional DNA that may be there.
And you say they're assumed contributors because depending upon the location, for instance, somebody's house, you would expect if there were multiple people in that house that perhaps everybody in the house could contribute to a certain DNA result.
It's possible.
So you'd want samples from all those folks to see if they contributed to an item that would be associated with a place where they congregated.
Correct.
And I noticed from your case file that you also requested, but I don't think you received, elimination samples from agents who were involved in this case.
Correct.
Why do you request those samples?
The type of testing we perform is quite sensitive, and so it is a standard practice that we request elimination samples from any of the investigators involved in order to potentially eliminate them in case they could have contaminated the evidence.
Okay. Now, in report number 157, if you could bring that up, please. Oliver 157, which has been admitted. The elimination samples that you requested in connection with items seized from Mr. Robinson's apartment were from Amber Robinson, Matthew Robinson, and Lance Twiggs, correct?
Correct.
And that's because you had information that those people were associated with the house.
Correct.
And when you tested or compared, first of all, you determined their DNA types, right?
Correct.
Then you compared their types to what you found on the evidence.
Correct.
And for a certain number of those samples, you found the presence of DNA of your elimination samples, not because they were suspects, but because they were associated with the premises, right?
There was support for inclusion of some of these individuals, yes.
Okay, and if you could scroll down to page 4, which is the table, I just want to review briefly with you. For instance, item number 1.4, which was a swab from the rifle. You used the elimination sample of Mr. Robinson's father, and you found his DNA on that particular swab, correct?
I would say there's support for inclusion of Matthew Robinson on the sample obtained from the swabs of the bolt of the rifle.
I'm glad you pointed that out. That's, again, consistent with your other testimony. You're talking again about support for inclusion as a possible contributor.
Correct. And
Again, not because he's a suspect, but because he's associated with that premise.
correct, and there would have been a likelihood ratio statistic calculated and to go along with that.
Okay. Could you go to the next page? Similarly, with respect to 1.6, you found, again, Matthew Robinson on swap number 1.6, or a profile that indicated he was a possible contributor.
There is support for inclusion of Matthew Robinson.
Okay. And next page, actually go page to page 7. You found support for inclusion of Lance Twiggs on swabs of buttons of a Dremel tool, correct?
Correct.
And going back to what we were talking about before, if a person named Lance Twiggs lived in that residence, came into contact with Tyler Robinson, and then touched a button on a Dremel tool, you'd expect Mr. Robinson and Mr. Twiggs's DNA to be on there, right? Or you could.
It's reasonable to assume that anyone living in the household could have contributed to DNA on an object found in that household.
And similarly, you found profiles to suggest support for inclusion of Mr. Twiggs on other areas of the Dremel tool, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, the last area I want to ask you about is, you're familiar with something called NGS?
Yes.
What is NGS?
NGS stands for Next Generation Sequencing. It's a DNA technique that sequences your DNA, so it looks at the individual sequence of your DNA.
And is it true that in your field, that whole area of NGS is something that's at the forefront of everybody's attention? For instance, when you go to seminars and you look at the presentations, there's a lot of talk about NGS, right?
That's correct. Yes, it's a newer technique.
And is it being developed by ATF as a technique that's going to be used or has been used?
Not at this time, no.
And is there plans to do that?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. Do you know if other labs have implemented it?
I believe there may be some laboratories in the United States that have it in use, but I wouldn't have direct knowledge of that.
Now, you used a program in this case called STR Mix, correct?
Correct.
And that's sold by a company in New Zealand, that software?
Correct.
Have they developed another program called STR Mix NGS?
I'm not aware of NGS software.
Could you go to 156, Oliver 156? Let me know when you're there. Are you aware that STR, the developers are selling a product called STR Mix NGS?
I was not aware, no.
Okay. Now, sequencing analysis is different than what you did in this case, correct?
Correct.
And how so?
As I said, sequencing is looking at the individual sequence, the individual bases that make up your DNA, as opposed to the testing that I'm performing, which is looking at length variations. So STR testing, which is the testing I perform, looks at areas of the DNA that are known to be highly variable between individuals, and there are areas where the DNA sequence repeats itself over and over again. And depending on who you are as an individual, you may have a different number of repeats present at that location. So the testing we're performing is looking at those length variations. There's a distinction between, say, if you have 10 repeats versus 12 repeats.
But you're not looking within those lengths to see what the sequence of the DNA is.
Correct.
And that's what this new technology is designed to look at.
Correct.
And the reason it's designed to look at that is because it's been found that there are DNA areas that are different in sequence, even though they're the same length. Is that true?
I think the reason for developing NGS software is to add another tool to a forensic biologist tool belt.